Millionaire got his maid, pregnant and rejected child. But everything changed when he saw baby color. The hospital room smelled of antiseptic, yet nothing could cleanse the heaviness in the air. Elena lay weak on the bed, her body trembling from hours of labor. She cradled the tiny bundle she had fought so hard to bring into the world. Her eyes were filled with exhaustion, but also with a fragile kind of love. Beside her stood Adrian Cole, a man of power and wealth, whose cold gaze could cut deeper than any knife. To him, she was nothing more than the maid, someone to serve, someone to forget once he had taken what he wanted. He looked at the infant in her arms only briefly, then turned his eyes away. "This child isn't mine," he said flatly, his voice void of warmth. Without a second glance, he walked toward the door, leaving behind the mother and newborn. For Adrian, the matter was finished, but for Elena, the moment carved scars she knew would never fade. She held her child closer, tears sliding down her cheeks. She had once believed his promises whispered in the dark, the gentleness that felt real for fleeting moments. But Adrian was a man used to ownership, not connection. Women to him were ornaments. Employees were tools. His money gave him the illusion that he was untouchable, above consequence. Elena had once been invisible in his grand mansion. She washed dishes that no one noticed, cleaned rooms that gleamed under someone else's name, carried laundry through hallways lined with gold. To Adrian she had been background noise, useful, disposable, silent, until one lonely night blurred by whiskey when he pulled her into his world, not with tenderness, but with entitlement. By morning he returned to his routines, his meetings, his indulgence. She returned to scrubbing floors, pretending nothing had happened. But consequences did arrive, and Elena was the one left to face them. When she told him she was pregnant, his eyes hardened like stone. He slid an envelope of money across the counter, his tone cold. "Handle it." His words dripped with disgust, not remorse. Her refusal lit a flicker of rage in him. "Don't you dare think you'll trap me with this. I don't want you, I don't want it." From that day forward, Elena carried her burden alone. Whispers followed her in markets, judgment pierced her in church pews, and exhaustion weighed on her bones. Yet she refused to surrender. She would give her child life no matter the cost. And so, on that stormy night, she lay in the hospital, her hands shaking as she brought forth the child who would change everything. Adrian showed up not out of compassion but out of pride, just to confirm what he already believed. When he saw her holding the baby, he recoiled, repeating with icy certainty, "This isn't mine." Elena did not beg, nor plead. She only held her baby tighter, as if shielding it from the man who should have been its protector. Adrian's footsteps faded down the hallway, leaving behind silence more suffocating than the sterile air of the room. Adrian Cole returned to his mansion that night, convincing himself he had done the right thing. His friends often reminded him, in smoke-filled rooms and over glasses of fine wine, that women like Elena only sought opportunity. "You did well, Cole," they told him. "She's after your money, nothing more." Their words reinforced his pride, but they didn't erase the images that haunted him. The baby's small cry, Elena's trembling hands, the way she had clutched her child as if defending it from the world. He told himself it didn't matter. He had built his life on control over his empire, over his employees, over the women who passed through his arms like whispers of the night. This situation was no different, he insisted. Yet in the silence of his mansion, where chandeliers sparkled over empty halls, he began to hear the faint echo of his own choices. Nights grew restless. The clink of ice in his glass did not silence the memory of Elena's tears. Sleep became fractured, pierced by dreams of a child's face he refused to acknowledge. Pride wrapped around him like chains, convincing him that he was untouchable, that feelings were weakness. But fate has a way of cracking the armor of even the proudest men. Weeks later, curiosity gnawed at him. Against his better judgment, he returned to the hospital, pretending he had business nearby. From a distance, he saw Elena sitting by the window, rocking the baby in her arms. The world outside was ordinary, cars passing, nurses walking briskly. But in that moment, Adrian's world froze. She adjusted the blanket, and the infant stirred, blinking awake. Adrian caught sight of the eyes, grey, cold, unyielding. Eyes that mirrored his own. Eyes that mirrored his father's, his grandfather's. Generations staring back at him from a tiny face. His chest tightened, his breath faltered. In that instant, his carefully constructed denial collapsed. He had rejected his own blood. He had spat on the very legacy he so proudly paraded in boardrooms. The truth was undeniable. He stumbled into the hallway, dizzy with the weight of realization. The child was his. When he confronted Elena days later, she did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence was louder than any scream. Finally, she whispered, her voice laced with years of pain. "You used me as if I were nothing. You left me to carry him alone. You don't deserve to hold him now." Her words sliced through him, sharper than any business loss or betrayal. For the first time, Adrian felt something heavier than wealth, something that no money could shield him from: shame. That night, as rain hammered against his mansion windows, Adrian sat in darkness. His reflection in the glass was no longer that of a powerful man, but of someone hollow. He realized with a clarity that terrified him, he had denied love, not just responsibility. He had denied himself the one thing money could never buy. One stormy night, Adrian couldn't fight the weight of his conscience anymore. The walls of his mansion, once symbols of triumph, now felt like a prison echoing with his mistakes. He grabbed his coat, drove through the rain, and stopped before a small, worn apartment building. The marble floors and sparkling chandeliers he was used to were gone. Here, the stairwell smelled of dust and struggle. But something about this place felt more real than all the luxury he had ever surrounded himself with. He climbed the narrow stairs and knocked. The door opened slowly. Elena stood there, her face pale but firm, her eyes guarded. She did not move aside to welcome him. For a long moment, she just stared at him, as though trying to measure whether he was still the same man who had walked out of her hospital room. Inside, the baby slept peacefully in a crib by the window. Adrian's eyes softened at the sight. He stepped forward, but his chest tightened with every move closer. When the child stirred and opened his eyes, Adrian froze. Those unmistakable grey eyes met his again, calm yet piercing. His knees gave way, and he knelt beside the crib, trembling. Tears spilled down his face, his voice cracking as he whispered, "I was wrong. He's mine. I see him now." Elena stood back, arms crossed tightly over her chest. She had no tears left for him, no forgiveness waiting. "You can't erase what you said," she told him quietly. "You can't erase the months I carried him alone, the nights I prayed for help that never came. You can't erase treating me as if I were nothing." Adrian broke in that moment. The man who once ruled boardrooms with ruthless precision now pressed his forehead against the edge of the crib, sobbing quietly. For the first time in his life, he wasn't a millionaire, wasn't a figure of power. He was simply a man begging for redemption. In the days that followed, Adrian began returning to Elena's apartment, not as a master, not bearing gifts or lawyers, but as a man stripped of pride. At first, she barely let him in. She stood watchful as he fumbled clumsily with bottles, changed diapers with shaking hands, or rocked the baby to sleep with stiff, awkward movements. But what surprised her most was that he kept coming back. He didn't send servants. He didn't delegate the responsibility. He came himself, night after night. Little by little, he learned. He learned to cradle his son against his chest until the baby's tiny breath steadied. He whispered lullabies in a voice cracked with guilt, songs he hadn't sung since his own childhood. And when the baby's tiny hand wrapped around his finger, Adrian wept silently. For in that fragile grip, he felt something his millions could never buy: innocence, trust, a chance at forgiveness. Elena's walls remained firm. She hadn't forgotten his cold dismissal in the hospital, the words that pierced her when she was most vulnerable. But she also saw consistency where once there had only been arrogance. Adrian was no longer trying to protect his pride, he was trying to be a father. The weeks turned into months, and Adrian's visits became a steady rhythm. The man who had once measured his worth by the size of his bank account and the number of companies under his name now measured it by the sound of his son's laughter echoing through the modest apartment. Elena remained cautious, her heart still scarred by the rejection she had endured. She did not let him forget it either. One good deed doesn't erase 1,000 wounds, she reminded him more than once. Adrian did not argue. He only lowered his head, accepting her words like a man finally learning humility. Still, she couldn't ignore what she saw. Each night he returned, not with polished arrogance, not with expensive gifts, but with tired eyes and a quiet determination. She watched as he gave up late meetings, skipped lavish dinners, and arrived at her door with the clumsy eagerness of a man desperate to make things right. The transformation was undeniable. Adrian Cole, who had once commanded fear and respect in every room he entered, now sat on the floor of a small apartment, stacking toy blocks and laughing when they toppled. He found himself at peace in the simplicity he had once despised. For Adrian, the empire he had built began to feel hollow. The contracts, the stock markets, the prestigious gatherings, all of it seemed meaningless compared to the small hand that reached for him in the dark. He had lived decades chasing power, but true power, he realized, was in showing up. It was in being present for the child who bore his eyes, in earning even a fraction of Elena's trust back, in learning love not as possession, but as sacrifice. Years later, the boy grew healthy and strong, shielded by his mother's devotion and slowly embraced by a father who had once denied him. He would never remember the pain of rejection, nor the hospital room where his father had turned away. What he would remember was the man who came back again and again until the walls between them began to crumble. Elena, too, softened over time. She did not forget. Scars rarely disappear, but she began to recognize the change. Adrian had chosen consistency over pride, humility over power. He had chosen family, something he once thought was beneath him. And though forgiveness was not spoken outright, it lived quietly in the moments when she let him rock their son to sleep, in the nights when she no longer closed the door on him. For Adrian, wealth took on a new meaning. The laughter of a child in a modest apartment became richer than the applause of shareholders. The warmth of Elena's wary but steady gaze was more valuable than the hollow admiration of strangers. He understood now that the greatest poverty was not the absence of money, it was the absence of love. For the first time in his life, Adrian chose wealth of the heart over wealth of the world, and once he did, he never looked back.